we often have clients ask us for things without really explaining like why they want that. They'll be like, oh, well, it would sure be great if your software could do blah, blah, blah. And we're like, well, it doesn't do that. But if we could understand more about why you want that, I bet there's like 5 other ways we could help you get that.
Hello and welcome to Confessions of a B2B Entrepreneur. My name is Tom Hunter, your host, and today we have Millie, the founder and CEO of Brilliant. Now, Millie has absolutely smashed it, running a business for around 8 years, but zero funding, completely bootstrapped. We've got physical world elements, we've got software, and we, of course, have awesome culture. These are things that I love in businesses. I love how Millie and the whole company thinks differently about things, and you'll find out what I mean by listening to this episode. Before that, let's give a big shout out to fame.so, the company who is producing this show. If you want one like this, go to fame.so and request a proposal. Let's jump into this discussion right now. Millie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tom. Excited to be here.
So I get super excited when I hear stories about cool things, physical things being sent to people, whether that's like existing customers or people like in sales processes. I see the posts on LinkedIn or Twitter, etc. And I presume a number of them may have come from your company. So my very first question is, I bet you have some really cool stories about physical gifts being sent as part of a, let's say, a marketing or sales process. And I'd love to hear them.
I have got many stories, and I also get very excited when I see all that stuff. Who doesn't love to get stuff in the mail? Everyone loves it. My little kids love it. I love it. You love it. So yeah. So Brilliant has been sending all kinds of cool stuff all over the world since 2015. Back when I started the company, it was bootstrapped, and I was kind of just figuring everything out myself as I went along. One of the earliest examples of a large scale, really cool direct mail campaign in the marketing funnel was we had a client, still do, Greenhouse, the applicant tracking system. They're incredible. Wanted to send plants to executives in human resources. They wanted to send succulents that were potted. And we had a short timeline. And we literally, I don't think they know this yet, but they might now, packed them in my garage. My mom was there. We hired some guys on Craigslist to help. And we packed 850 succulents in custom packaging with custom collateral in my garage over the course of 2 days, and had to call USPS to bring a special truck. And my neighbors were all staring. And those were the earliest days, but it's gotten a lot more professional for us since then. We now have a 30,000 square foot warehouse facility outside of Chicago where we do everything totally above board. Though, frankly, I don't think we would pack a bunch of succulents ourselves anymore, but we did back then. We use a ton of gifting in our own marketing funnel at Brilliant. Have you guys ever done that at Fame?
When somebody assigns, they get sent a book. And so kind of, but probably not the same scale.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool, though, especially given you guys are all fully remote, and I'm sure your clients are remote. Just getting off the screen and into real life seems to make a really big difference to everyone. It's just such a shift. And you're bringing something like your product is not a physical product. It's a digital product, I guess, or an intellectual product. And the sort of honor of shifting that from screen and brain into physical reality is actually like pretty meaningful. I think we use a ton of gifting ourselves because we really, truly believe in it. And we've seen it work for our clients, and we've seen it work for ourselves. What we do at Brilliant is, well, first, we have a lot of principles that we always keep in mind when we devise direct mail gifting campaigns. So one of them is all the details matter. So packaging, collateral, the digital touch points that go into collecting addresses from recipients and collecting preferences, and even what happens after the gift is delivered, the post-gift experience. So all of that matters, and we care a ton that that is on brand and echoes the right call to action and is really just reinforcing the message you're trying to drive. Because at its heart, this either sounds really cold and evil or just honest. Gifting is about making an emotional impact. And what we're trying to do is help our clients make an emotional impact for profit, functionally, for their business at scale. So that can be really tricky because making an emotional impact has a lot to do with knowing your audience, yet we're trying to do things that are ideally one-to-many because you can be a lot more thoughtful and put together a much cooler gift if you're sending out many, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense. And I agree with the details matter because I think it can go badly if you get it wrong.
Totally.
Like you send the classic thing. What's your view on sending things that are just like a piece of, no, I don't say useless, but like a not very usable piece of swag that has the client's logo on, Are you like for that or against that?
So against that, the most against that. One of our first principles that we sort of landed on as a company was we'd rather sell you no swag than sell you bad swag. I like to think it is I don't like to think it is. It is bad brand karma to put your logo on a piece of crap and send it out into the world and give it to someone. And then imagine what they're going to do with it. They're going to think, what idiot came up with this? Who thought this was a good idea? They're going to throw it at their kids, friendly throw. And their kids are going to play with it and it's going to end up broken in the toy bin. And there's your logo like lumping around in the toy bin, or maybe it's going to go in the charity bin to go to the thrift store, or maybe just straight in the trash. That's horrible and bad brand karma and a waste of money and actually probably net negative on your brand. So I'd really rather sell you nothing or save your money and save it up for something good. The sort of less obvious bad gift moment to me, though, is a lot of our competitors, for reasons of it's scalable and you don't have to invest a lot up front, push these kind of marketplace gifts where they come direct from a vendor, which these vendors are selling really cool, great products, but the entire experience hasn't been vetted. So you're not sure when it's going to ship. You're not sure if they're going to put your card and gift message in the package. The box might just be a plain brown box. The packaging might not be wrapped up like a gift. So the more you lose control over that whole experience, the less you're sure you're actually going to see the bang for the buck that you're after in your gifting campaign. And I just think it matters so much that you control that experience and really deliver a wow unboxing experience. That's why we took the time and went to the trouble and expense of building our own warehouse facility. There's tons of great 3PLs out in the world who fulfill for e-commerce and are aimed at efficiency and precision and perfect pick and pack, though frankly, they make mistakes too. We wanted to build something different. We wanted to build a fulfillment experience that created a perfect unboxing so that our clients' gifts would be social media worthy. The stuff you see on LinkedIn and Instagram really wow the recipient and create that emotional response from the moment that package hits their doorstep.
Yeah, when you were describing like the bad packaging experience, you're kind of describing how we send our books, but we'll work on that.
Okay, we can talk about that after.
For sure. So tying that all together and moving on to the next phase of this discussion with the greenhouse campaign, because that is it's like on brand. It's like presumably didn't have the logo like printed on the leaves.
We had it on the pot.
Okay.
It looked really cool and we sourced this beautiful pot. And if you've seen their logo, it's this cute little G. So it's also subtle, which I think matters a ton, because going back to that empathy point and going back to like putting it in the bin and not wanting it, nobody really wants to get a big pot with greenhouse slathered all over it unless they're like in love with greenhouse, and they should be because greenhouse is amazing. But I mean, greenhouse isn't trying to make a billboard on its recipients' desks. They're trying to give their recipients something nice that make them think nice things about greenhouse. So it only needs to be ever so subtle to remind them that greenhouse gave them this great pot. And actually they make a bigger impact by making it subtle, because the person's way more likely to keep it on their desk and look at it 10 times a day for the next year if they keep it subtle and don't go over the top. So that is also a really big part of what we do, is advising our clients how to kind of not overdo the branding to the end of ruining the gift in a lot of ways. Sort of like, remember when Homer bought Marge the bowling ball with Homer's name on it? Simpsons episode?
I don't know if I've seen that one, but
okay, well,
that I think illustrates the point.
Yes.
So the other interesting thing that I wanted to ask about the greenhouse campaign, obviously, was this was an early campaign for you guys. And as you mentioned, at least at the start, you hadn't raised any money. And so I'd love to know like the early financing or the early journey of the company, like how you were able to buy all those trees. Maybe they paid in advance, but I'd love to hear like the early stages, how you managed this.
Yeah, for sure. We are proudly bootstrapped. I started the company all by myself, quit my job. I was working at a venture-backed Silicon Valley company, AngelList, great company. has spun out into a number of cool things they're doing now, including Well-Found, a great talent network. So I had been working there, and part of my job there was actually helping founders, early stage founders, raise their first round. And I met a lot of really smart people who were amazing and working on cool ideas, but it never really made sense to me how they were going to turn those ideas into a business that could be sustainable on its own. So I spent a lot of time when I was working at AngelList contemplating the fact that I wanted to start a company myself, but that I also didn't want to go that route. And no shade to anyone who raises venture money. That's amazing and incredible all by itself. But that was a choice I didn't want to make and the route that I didn't want to take. So luckily, I am a self-taught software engineer. So I was able to write all the code myself. And everyone can pack a box, and most people can pick up the phone and make a sales call. And, I've just been a person of the internet ever since I grew up in the 90s. So was able to sort of cobble it all together from the beginning and prove the concept enough that I felt convinced that it was worth continuing and making no salary. And I could see a path to it turning into kind of profitable enough to pay for my expenses and going beyond that. So that's what we did. We have been profitable every year since inception and never had a layoff, have just always been slow and steady and stable. And we've grown from 0 to over 100 people since 2015. So that's been really fun and something I'm proud of, especially because it was my intention. It was what I set out to do.
I'd love to dig into after you were speaking with all these founders that were raising money, what was the thing that made you be like, I never want to do this?
So I had an experience raising venture capital before I worked at AngelList. I raised for a company called CakeStyle. We were a high-end version of Stitch Fix. So we were sending $3,000 worth of clothes in a box to professional women, essentially, or maybe fancy moms, if you will. This was around the time Stitch Fix came up also, and we did it from within an incubator that I had worked at in Chicago. And it was truly an incredible experience. I learned a ton. We were growing like crazy. We had just had our best ever month. It was June of 2013. We'd had our best ever month. We'd been out trying to raise our Series A. And I had met with 40 something of the who's who of Silicon Valley venture firms at the time. And one of the biggest hangups for them was our cap table was kind of funky, because we had started the company within an incubator and they had taken a majority of the shares. And I was a sweet summer child back then, and I had no idea that that was bad. I was just happy to be working on a startup and making a salary and learning a ton and just having a great work moment, and our company was working. And so, to long story short, we were not able to raise the Series A out in Silicon Valley. We had a Chicago investor write us a term sheet. And when he delivered it to me, he said something pretty derogatory about me and my co-founder. And I was like, gosh, I'm going to have to work with this guy for the next 5 years. And I went to my boss at the incubator and I said, this doesn't seem like it's going to be good. He was like, okay, well, we'll bridge you. We'll write a bridge check and we'll figure this out some other way. Because I agree, that guy seems like no good. And a few weeks later, I don't know what happened, but it seems like they changed their mind. And they decided they didn't want to have an incubator anymore. And frankly, at the time, it was devastating and shocking. But in hindsight, I don't think that model was working for them. The cap table thing didn't work. I don't think the pockets were deep enough to get the companies as far as they needed to go to make it make sense. And they shifted focus, and now they focus on a lot of things that they're doing great at. But for me, that experience, sort of seeing almost the underbelly or how it can go wrong, it felt like we were doing everything right. We had our best ever revenue month. We'd just done $500,000 in revenue in the month of June. We were riding high. We were it felt neck and neck with this other company, Stitch Fix, our competitor, who was raising venture rounds, and our customers loved us. And yet we shut down in a matter of 2 weeks. And that was really devastating. And I didn't want to find myself there again. I wanted to make sure I had a little more control over the outcome for myself. And I knew that operating unprofitably, they call it default dead versus default alive. I knew I wanted to be default alive because that meant I could choose whether I kept going rather than sort of let the numbers choose for me. So that was in the back of my mind. And then I went to work at AngelList and I saw all these smart founders and I met all these angels. And my job was to sort of help put the deals together and get them done. And the whole time I was looking around and trying to contemplate whether there was an idea for me that I felt compelled to raise money for, or whether I had an idea for how I could start a profitable company. And that was sort of where I was mentally when that all happened.
I totally understand this. Like taking that whole potential risk out of the equation. The other potential risk that both of us have actually taken out of the equation as well is co-founder risk. Was that a conscious decision by you for the same reasons?
Gosh, no, it wasn't. I wish I could say it was, because I think a lot of what I've done is conscious and has been conscious. I'm a pretty big introvert and I like all the jobs. And if you talk to my team here, you'll know that I've done every job in this whole company. And when it comes time to go hire someone to focus on a specific function, because it's time now, that function's a grown-up function and it needs to exist on its own, I'm always a little sad to see it go. Like, oh man, I want to be the head of product. Oh man, I want to be the head of sales. So I think it was certainly unconscious to start the company as a solo founder, but very on brand and a fit for my personality and all the things I love. Just sort of slipped into it and it was fine. I just didn't feel like I needed anybody. So I know the prevailing wisdom is go find your founding team first. And that's the most important thing. But it just honestly didn't even occur to me. I had it covered. And sometimes when you get other people in the mix, I mean, a lot of times you get way better ideas and you come to cooler conclusions and it's more fun with a friend. But also there's potential for disagreement and you might not be strategically aligned and talking takes up a lot of time. And I was just in a room by myself making stuff happen. So I think there's a lot to be said for actually the efficiency that comes from not really having to compromise all the time and not really having to get aligned and not having to make process. And we held off for a long time at Brilliant on making a lot of processes. We drag our feet. We didn't hire HR until we were about 45 people. I think you can actually save a lot of time by being direct. And I call it not playing business. So just being as effective as possible and solving problems and not thinking too much of yourself.
Yeah, I read something interesting on Twitter the other day about how VCs actually want you to have a co-founder, right? Because there's a single point of failure if you don't. And so the narrative is you need a co-founder, but actually you can avoid this stuff.
That makes so much sense. And I have friends who started famous venture-backed companies with co-founders and like famously ended up in therapy with their co-founders. Like this stuff is not drama-free and it's similar to a marriage. If you don't know the person really well and you're not positive it's going to be a good fit, even when you are, I mean, that can be challenging for people, but it's a really big commitment. And I don't know that like founder dating is enough. For me at the time, there just wasn't an obvious choice for who I would start a company with. And it felt weird to try to force it.
So we've already discussed this a little bit in that for a chunk of the time, especially in the early parts of the company, you're doing everything. But I find it super interesting to ask bootstrapped entrepreneurs, especially, how their role has evolved. And maybe we can miss out the time when you're literally coding, selling, doing everything, packing the trees, to maybe like the last 4 years. Like how has your role changed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it was in kind of late 2019, early 2020 that I realized I was not doing the business justice by being sort of the only leadership team member in the room. And I realized it was time to build out a real leadership team. And so I think that was a big shift for me to realize it's time to divide the baby and bring someone in. And I was lucky I had Lindsay Cohen. She and I had worked together at Sandbox, the venture capital firm I mentioned earlier. And she'd been a great partner and just such an inspiring person. And she'd had some exits and she'd gone on to be a CMO at a venture-backed company. And we started chatting and we famously got together on Valentine's Day in 2020 and hashed out the terms. And she was all set to start on March 30th of 2020. And of course, everyone knows the world went crazy in between Valentine's Day and March 30th. And by the time March 30th rolled around, our revenue had dropped off a cliff to zero. We'd started the year riding high and we had, I think, literally a month of zero revenue. Not in March, it ended up being in April, but in March.
But why were people just not sending gifts? I guess they were cutting marketing spend maybe.
Everybody was just panicking for a hot minute, right? Like the world had shut down. No one knew what to do. I think there were spending freezes. So Lindsay was all set to start and I was nervous. I was like, I'm worried if this goes. I mean, it was only 2 weeks in at that point, the weirdness. But if it went on a lot, I mean, the problem with being bootstrapped is it's not like I've got $20 million in the bank to like ride it out. So I was nervous, but we went for it anyway. And Lindsay joined us and April was terrible and May sucked and June, everything changed and we got to go up and to the right with everyone else. And we were all ready. And I was so lucky I had Lindsay. And we continued to build out an incredible leadership team from there. So we hired a CTO, we hired a head of product, we hired a head of people, we hired a CFO. We've now hired a head of sales, a head of customer success. So we now have this 9-10 person leadership team that is incredible. And kind of around the time you start getting 4 or 5 people on your leadership team, which I guess I'm like 4 or 5 years into the business at this point, it's a little backwards, right? It had just been me. And now we're sort of parceling things off and creating process. And so my role's changing at this point. And it's like, what does it mean to be CEO? I saw a tweet the other day that said, a CEO is not supposed to do any work, but is responsible for all the work. That did not resonate with me. I actually love doing the work. And I love I hope people wouldn't say I'm a micromanager. I don't think I am. I just like pitching in and helping and getting my hands dirty and understanding what's going on. And so for me, having to step back a little bit from that and not do the work myself or only do some parts of the work myself, that was interesting. Also kind of figuring out how to lead at that level. So what are the cadences and cycles and methodologies and frameworks I'm going to use to help organize and align my team? So around 2021, we adopted OKRs as a crew, which was actually incredible for us. I think it is a total leadership hack because it really delegates a lot of the aspects of functional leadership to the functional leads. And you get that. Are you familiar with OKRs? I'm sure you are. Yeah. Objectives and key results, in case your listeners aren't. I think Google originated framework for creating company-wide alignment, goals, and focus, and then trickling those down. So the functions have their own OKRs, sub-functions, sub-teams. And I think at Google, they say individuals do. We haven't gotten that far yet. So OKRs were actually huge for us. So we adopted OKRs and started having sort of regular meeting cadences and questions prompted by them. And that was really helpful to add structure. I'm not always the most process-oriented person, but having some process and having some outlet for everyone to get together and just have those sort of whiteboard conversations about where we're going and what the vision is, that's been great. And then I guess I would say, so we're default alive now. I think we're surviving and thriving. That's this phase. And then we're now into this phase of thinking big. So we've got this great privilege of being able to think big because we're making enough money that we're actually funding ourselves little mini venture rounds every single month, I like to think. And so we get to think what's around the corner and what's a big splash we can make and where can we make the biggest impact. And what's been cool about the business is the sort of output is physical gifts, but there's a huge technology component to this that enables the sending of the gifts and kind of is the icing on the cake of the recipient experience. And it's also really important for our clients to be able to operate at scale and integrate Brilliant with their sources of truth. So you can send gifts that are triggered by Salesforce or Marketo or HubSpot, or maybe every time you have a Zoom meeting, you send a thank you gift after. So there's all kinds of ways technology can interplay. And so we've been trying to continue to raise the bar in terms of how can tech make gifting cooler, smarter, better, faster, more impactful, and kind of align with our clients' OKRs. So thinking empathetically about what's the head of people at a Series C startup worried about and what's keeping them up at night? And how can we help with cool gifts? And you actually can help a little bit.
And so thinking big is on your like daily to-do list, I assume. But I also assume another piece that I was learning about today is culture and specifically, or also thinking differently, because you guys don't work on quarters, right? You work on something else. So I'd love to just get you to share about how you guys like to think differently internally and how that breeds into the culture of the business.
Yeah. One of our company values is always ask why / question everything. And this applies externally and internally. I don't know if you're faced with this in your role, But we often have clients ask us for things without really explaining like why they want that. They'll be like, oh, well, it would sure be great if your software could do blah, blah, blah. And we're like, well, it doesn't do that. But if we could understand more about why you want that, I bet there's like 5 other ways we could help you get that. So it's been a journey actually to coach. Our team is, for better or worse, a bunch of people pleasers. Like they want to be loved. Like we work in gifting. We're happy. Like we want to make people smile. And so it's been a really interesting journey in coaching the team to feel comfortable asking why, because I think we're also a lot of women. I think it's like 80% female on the team. I think we're like cultivated to not talk back and question on some level, like not aggressively, but like there's this like ingrained thing that if somebody asks you for something, you say like, why, that would be considered rude or pushing back. And so, yeah, it's all about how you ask why, like not with like a snarky smirk on your face, but hey, I hear you. Great ask. Can I dig in a little more and find out what's driving that? Because either I can bring that to my team and make a business case for it, or I can help suggest some alternatives that might be available right now. So kind of coaching the team to ask why. But then that goes internally too. So let no good process go unquestioned or no bad process. I've always been someone who has questioned rules and wanted to know why we had to do it that way. So trimesters is a really good example. Of course, the business world works on quarters. And we started originally doing our OKRs on a quarterly basis. And it's probably like our 3rd or 4th OKR cycle. It got to be the middle of the quarter and we were like, oh shit, this feels too soon to do another round of these. Like we're just starting on these ones. And Lindsay and I were having this chat and we sort of looked at each other and we're like, is it a cop out if we move the goalposts? Like what would happen if we did? So we talked about the pros and the cons, and it's not like we have a board we have to go report to. So it's not like anyone cares. Like who even cares about when we stop reporting our OKRs? Like they're just for us. So we talked about it and we realized if we switched to trimesters, meaning 4 months in an OKR period instead of 3, we would only do all those meetings 3 times a year instead of 4, which is actually a pretty significant savings of time and paperwork and meetings that as long as you don't feel like you need that like 3-month cadence, who cares? Actually, we cared a lot. It saved us a bunch of time and it gave us a little more time to get that particular set of OKRs done. And what we found is that 4-month cycle just feels right to us. And that's then propagated and perpetuated into other things we do cyclically. We have some components of comp that are performance-based, so based on output or client performance in a given trimester. And we only have to run those numbers 3 times a year. So the other way this comes up sometimes is we'll be at the end of a month and we'll be like, we have a revenue goal for that month. And we're kind of all cheering and aligned to the revenue goal. And someone's got a huge order and it could either hit the last day of the month or it might hit in the next 3 days of the next month. And it's like a little hard to not want to push to get that thing closed by the end of the month, just because that's like what everyone's talking about. But actually, it makes no difference to us at all if we close that order tomorrow or today. So we very rarely will like discount an order and give an exploding offer at the end of the month because it just doesn't matter. Only for vanity and pride and, I don't know, people getting excited about calendars.
On the shifting from quarterly to trimester thing, I think you guys call that doing less business.
Yeah, there you go. That's perfect.
Okay, so there's like the think differently piece, how that breathes into the culture, thinking big. Is there anything else you're focused on for 2024?
We have a really cool, splashy, yet super functional technology play we're working on. It's about AI. I know. It's so embarrassing. And of course, in true brilliant fashion, we are not planning to launch it externally. We're planning to launch it internally. So I don't want to say too much, but we are trying to innovate in the space. I think that the theme that this ties to, that's been a theme since the beginning of time, is, for me, beginning of time being 2015, the theme for me has been trying to create a place where people want to work or aren't miserable or some version of that side of the spectrum. And to me, what makes me miserable at work is doing the same stupid task over and over again and knowing that it doesn't use my one special brain in a special way, but instead it is just a grind and is paperwork and is pushing paper, basically. And so we have been oriented since day one around figuring out how do we take the grunt work out of This is, for better or worse, a somewhat people-heavy business for us because gifting is a very human job and you need a person. Our sort of key role at Brilliant is called the creative partner. This is your partner in crime when it comes to gifting, and they get to know you, they get to know your company, they get to know your brand, and they're all set to help make really great recommendations for you for what to give, find the coolest products, come up with cool designs, really just like curate everything in a white glove fashion to make your life as the sort of gift giver at your company easier. And if you think about it, like the head of people at a Series C startup or HR manager at a Series C startup or marketing manager, gifting isn't probably in their job description, yet it is this surprise task that can be a huge burden and is almost like really risky too, because if you screw it up and you send 1,000 mugs in the wrong color green to the Hong Kong office, even if it's not your fault, you look like an idiot. So the human element of this job is really important. The creative partner is someone that they trust and they lean on. And when mistakes happen, that person swoops in and makes it feel like it's going to be okay. And they help get it fixed. And so there's always going to be this human component of the job. But there's a bunch of repeat tasks also. And so we have been focused from the beginning on figuring out how to take as many of those repeat tasks as possible off of our amazing creative partners' plates so they can focus on what makes them human and amazing and smart and a great sidekick. And so our sort of big R&D project this year ties a bit to that. The open question, whether we've debated a long time, how much self-service do we want our clients to be able to have with Brilliant? If you can go to forimprint.com and buy all the pieces of a great gift yourself, but it's actually a lot of work if you haven't tried it. We'll get a lot of clients come to us and they've actually done that before, and they all sat around a conference table and boxed gifts, and they were like, never again. So self-service has been a conversation we've had for a long time at Brilliant around how much do we want to let clients self-serve versus how much do we believe in our white glove concierge model. And so we're leaning into our philosophy that at scale, when you're doing a large-scale gifting project and you care a lot about your brand, which is our ICP, our ideal customer, that having that human, having that smart, trusted sidekick is actually really important. So we are focused on continuing to superpower our team to be extra great and ideally happy and content at work, which, it's work. We have to pay them, but we hope they are relatively happy and they like their jobs, and we think they do.
So, Millie, I love the B2B area. I also love people that bootstrap, and I also love people that do things differently. And finally, I love the concept of doing less business. So this has been very eye-opening for me, and I'm sure it has been for the listeners as well. Now, we're obviously going to link to brilliantmade.com. That's the domain. If anybody in marketing or in HR wants to send some gifts, we'll also link to your LinkedIn. Anything else we should mention or link to?
I think so. That's perfect.
Millie, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
Okay, team, what an awesome journey. Thanks so much, Millie, for coming on and sharing that. So cool to see somebody do it solo, do it bootstrapped, do it in a way that's completely different to the norm. Especially the thing that really highlights this for me is the just being like, why do we do quarterly OKRs? Why don't we just do a trimester? Absolutely love that. So shout out to Brilliant and shout out to Millie. Thank you so much to Fame for producing this show. That's fame.so. And of course, thanks to you for listening.